The show focused on delivering beneficial information on everything to do with products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Welcome back to Key Pacific's Talk About Strata here on AM 650. I'm Stirling Faux. My co-host, as always, is Tony Gioventu, the Executive Director of the Condominium Home Owners Association of British Columbia. And our guest tonight is strata lawyer Stephen Hamilton, a partner at Hammerberg Lawyers in Vancouver. And Tony, you said you wanted to spend a fair bit of time on tonight's program talking about construction projects, and we've already addressed the issue of special levies, which provide a lot of the funding for these construction projects. What specifically did you have in mind?
Well, we're coming up to the time period now in history where very soon our first real strata that was constructed as a strata will be 50 years old.
Oh, okay.
So we're coming up to a time period now where we have a lot of strata corporations across province that are 25 to 50 years old.
Does that mean the Strata Act is 50 years old as well?
The first piece of legislation will be coming into that time period.
Interesting.
As well.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's quite a long period of time, and we've seen this enormous transition in our industry. But all of these buildings now are at the point that they need major work. A number of buildings have already done things like recladding building systems. They might be on their second or third roof, but there are other components such as elevator replacements that have to be done, or the plumbing in the building, which doesn't last forever because of our water and our treatment system in the Lower Mainland. Copper piping doesn't last for very long, and different varying grades of copper piping have short life expectancies. So some of the major construction that strata corporations go through, they break some pretty principal rules that gets them into a lot of trouble. So so we're dealing with all of the challenges that we have with major construction. I think plumbing in interiors of buildings is one of the most complicated, though, and the reason is because it doesn't involve just the common area of the strata corporation, but it also involves strata lots. You have to go in and retrofit the plumbing.
Oh, sure.
To the
Everybody's unit
lots, right?
has to be retrofitted, right?
So there's lots of room for error. So as we talk through the evolution of what happens with a major project, and we start to see this now with the depreciation reports. So the depreciation report is earmarked in 2016 that we're projecting that the plumbing in the building has to be renewed.
Right.
Already some early signs of some pinhole leaks in the building, so an indication that the plumbing has to be done. And one of the problems with deferring these kinds of repairs is the longer you defer, the more leaks and damages you have other kinds of consequences that occur. And one of the best examples is every time you have a leak and you have an insurance claim, the insurance deductible for waterscape will start to skyrocket. And it'll go from $5,000 to $10,000 to $25,000 to $100,000, $250,000, even $500,000, depending on the size of the building. Mainly because the Strata Corporation hasn't remediated this problem. It's a risk that has to be dealt with. And all of the other disruptions that people have in the building, their units get flooded out and they're out of their homes while repairs are being done. And Strata Corporations have only so much money that they need to spend just once.
Well, in this case, though, if it's 2014, and if the depreciation report has earmarked this major renovation or upgrade for 2016, that means we've got approximately a 2-year window now to organize the funding so that when it comes time for the project to be executed, the dough should be in the bank. That would be the practical approach, Stephen. But how frequently do strata councils, omit that important detail from the front, especially knowing now we've got a specific time frame within which we can gather funds?
Yeah, well, I think the human experience is that we tend to wait to the last minute to raise our money, and we like to hold on to our money as long as possible. With big construction projects, ordinarily the way it unfolds is that as the Strata Corporation and the ownership works through the repair project that they're considering, the funding at the end of the day, assuming they don't have a large contingency reserve fund, and they often don't,
right,
or they don't want to use it, usually the funding comes at the end, just as the project is being approved, and a special levy is raised to deal with the repair.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't seem, Tony, that would seem to be, if indeed that's fairly standard practice, wouldn't it be more practical wherever possible to alert the troops to start setting aside some dough? Because this one's going to be a shocker when we get the bill.
Well, the depreciation report's going to give us an estimate right? Estimate both on value and on time. That may or may not be that accurate with respects to the year. It's going to be based on some predictable values.
True.
But so what the Strata Corporation really needs to do first thing when they have a major project is they need to understand who's going to coordinate the information.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So when they need a consultant, someone who is actually a technical consultant qualified in that discipline. If it is plumbing, so a mechanical electrical engineer. If it is roofing, a roofing inspector.
And we had Sean Lane from the Interprovincial
we
Roof
just
Consultants.
dealt with Sean dealing with this.
And he'd be a perfect sort of a contractor to come in and supervise the project and handle the bidding process, really organize it on behalf of a strata council, who again are volunteers. They don't know from roofs.
Well, and that's the big question is we often ask ourselves who's actually qualified to coordinate this project.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not an average project manager on the street. This is somebody who's very clearly, specifically focused and qualified in that discipline.
Right.
A building envelope engineer for doors, windows, decks, balconies, cladding on the outside of a building. Right. Redoing a parking garage may require structural engineering and the coordination of that. So the easiest way is for a strata corporation to first spend the money they need on the consultant to coordinate the project. It helps them to identify the scope of the project, when it really needs to be done, and they will also help establish a budget for you.
Right.
What the realistic cost is likely going to be for this project. When the Strata Corporation have come to terms with that, and they've actually now made a decision to proceed with the project, then that's when we go into a tendering process.
Right, exactly.
And the Strata Corporation at that point will rely on the consultant to do the tendering. Now, there's a lot of discussion in the industry about, well, do we just pick a contractor or do we go to a tendering process in the general industry and see who bids the best price? That comes down to the decision of the Strata Corporation with the advice of the consultant. You may actually have an identified key contractor who can do this project and negotiate the relationship with that person while using a consultant to ensure that you're still getting what you need. The biggest pitfall for every strata corporation, and every one of them fail in this area, is they sign contracts without understanding what they're signing, and they don't get the information and the details in writing. Anything you talk about with your contractor or your consultant, any of the relationships, any of the additions, any of the changes to the contracts, work order changes, the physical contract and the relationship itself needs a written agreement. Now, I don't care whether you have a company coming in to replace 5 deck vinyl coverings or whether you're doing restructuring of the decks in a structural basis in the building, you need a written contract, because ultimately if it ends up in a dispute down the road, which many of them do because there's a lack of a contract, there's all kinds of misunderstandings, that contract is going to be worth everything for you with respects to the dispute.
Our guest, lawyer Stephen Hamilton, is nodding most emphatically. The devil is always in the details, isn't it, Stephen?
The devil is in the details, and it is surprising to see the number of strata corporations that will enter into some fairly significant repair projects that can be $500,000, $1 million, and you see the contract that they've signed with the contractor, and it can be a single piece of paper, often just an acceptance of a quote that the contractor made without some of the more important things you would look for in a contract, which will set out what exactly was the contractor supposed to do for you. When was the project supposed to start? When was it finished? Because sometimes I will have clients come to me and say, well, we started this project last May, and we thought it would be finished in 3 months, and now we're 10 months into it, and there seems to be no end in sight. And you look at the contract, and there are no details about when the project was supposed to end. And more importantly, there were no details about what remedies the Strata Corporation would have if the contractor didn't complete the job within the time that was promised.
So when you ask these clients who are now confounded and confused and angry in your office, do you often just say, why did you allow this sort of document to go through as the basis for a deal, considering it's $500,000 or higher? What do they say?
Well, it's a good question. I generally don't like to kick people when they're down.
But sometimes they must volunteer a response of some kind.
I think by the time they're getting into my office, they've already appreciated that they've made the wrong decision at the wrong time.
But it sounds like a decision that gets made more often than not, Stephen.
And I think it is. And again, with a group, with strata councils, even if they have property managers, a lot of times people fall into the trap where they think they can really evaluate the character of the person that they're dealing with as a contractor, and I think we all do that. We look at somebody and we say, we trust this guy. This guy seems to be the guy for us.
He's got an honest face.
He's got an honest face.
Right.
And as we all know, we're all very bad at assessing character. And by the time you realize that honest face wasn't so honest, it's too late. And so strata councils and property managers need to deal with the strata corporation's affairs as a business.
What also it may complicate things, and Tony and I have been down this road a couple of times. What happens though if when the contract is awarded, it turns out the guy that gets the job is the brother-in-law of the strata council president, and that wouldn't be a terribly unique situation at all, would it?
It's probably not as unique as it once was, because the Strata Property Act has some fairly stringent requirements for awarding contracts to people that are related to council members. So there has to be disclosure. The person can't participate in the strata council decision making.
Right, okay, sure.
Hopefully the council is making other owners aware of this problem or this issue, and so there's
but
all
it
that
does
kind of
happen, doesn't it?
It still happens, absolutely, yeah.
Well, the other challenge, though, is that strata corporations are really not that great about recording and documenting what they're doing. Right. You know, one of the phenomena that occurs within volunteer associations and communities is that the board or the council frequently will just simply defer to the one person who seems to be best informed on this issue. Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean that person is actually better informed than anyone else. And so everyone's looking for someone to play a leadership role and help us through this, and help us walk through these challenges, and help us walk through the stages of this construction. You have to hire professionals to do this.
Right.
A $50,000 contract to fix a deck that's leaking or a deck on a corner of a building that's rotted with just simply a quote that says, cost plus construction and whatnot, didn't contemplate all the additional costs for building materials and for demolition and removal of the site material, any contaminated materials, and then you discover the $50,000 contract. Strata's coming back to the owner saying, we need more money, we're over $400,000 now.
Right.
And that is not rare. I wish that was rare, but that is much more common than we understand.
What happens though, Stephen, when Tony's scenario gets really played out, and you were approximately estimating this repair to maybe $100,000 to $200,000, and it turns out it's $700,000 to $800,000 and climbing because it's still not finished, and the bills are still coming in. I'm sure this crosses your desk more than once a week. What happens in a situation like that where the contractor, that cash register just keeps grinding up the dough, and the strata council is kind of hooped? They don't know how to stop it.
Well, and the first thing the strata council has to recognize, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, is that the authority that they have to spend money ended with the special levy approval. So if they only had approval for $200,000 under their special levy, if that project has hit $200,000, they are out of authority, and they need to go back to the owners and explain to them, we've got a problem. We've got a contractor now that said it would be $200,000, but we're already at $200,000, and it looks like we need another $2 to get the job done.
Right.
So that scenario is the one that they have to grapple with first, and then the second problem they have to deal with is this contractor, and why are they over budget? What has happened? Is it something that's wrong with the contractor, or was the project just a different project that they than what they understood at the beginning? And sometimes that can happen. You can start a project and there can be rotten wood behind the siding, or if it's a mechanical problem, we're dealing with a big plumbing repair, maybe the kind of interior work that was required just expanded in scope. So there can be some explanations, but the key for the Strata Council is to always understand that their authority ended when that special levy money ran out.
Right. And beyond that, and of course the bills are still coming in daily in many cases, because generally there's more than one contractor involved on any kind of major project.
Right.
So how and if there's another special levy, if there's more huge numbers of dollars required, I mean, you've already asked the owners to pony up some pretty significant dough in the first place, and now at least that much again? I mean, and the owners, what? They have no recourse, do they?
Well, I wouldn't say they don't have any recourse. They certainly play a large role in the decision making when this is coming back to them. They will want to understand why the first $200,000 special levy didn't do the trick, and why they're being asked for more money. The council's job or the property manager's job is to make sure they're tracking that money. And if it looks like it's about to run out, they better be in a position to get back to the owners in time so that the project isn't delayed or stalled altogether, because contractors, at least most of them, will say, if you're not paying my bills, I don't think I'm coming back to work tomorrow. And you don't want that to happen, because that can create more expense.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does that from time to time happen where, the contractor just there, you reach the Mexican standoff, the impasse, where the council is not prepared to pay any more because they're not at all sure that they're getting value for their money. The contractor, not getting any money, stops coming to the job site, and there's an unfinished work environment where you live. Is this common? Does it happen, Tony?
It does happen. And the other side of that happens, in addition to the fact that they've run out of money, is that they've run out of the authority, as Steve said, to move forward. So what may happen is the contractor will have to secure the site to prevent any further damage to the site while the Strata Corporation has another meeting, informs the owners, gets more advice. They could have avoided a lot of these problems, though. One of the details, the devil's in the details.
Sure, you bet.
One of the details that we see Strata Corporations pinching pennies on is getting legal advice from a lawyer who understands contracts for major construction for Strata Corporations, to have an understanding of all the things that can go wrong.
Let me just quickly ask you, Stephen, if a Strata Council comes to you and says, we have to undertake this major construction, we have estimates, etc., we have what we think is a viable deal with the contractor, would you review this for us, please, before we agree to it? What would your fee for that review, that actual thing be?
Well, and we do that regularly.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and some contracts are very complex. If the project is a multi-million-dollar project, then often we're dealing with a contract called a CCDC contract, which is a complicated construction document, because the particular repair project requires that level of sophistication.
Sure.
For a lawyer to review that kind of agreement and provide some recommendations and some changes, you're probably looking at $1,500.
Right. But in the context of $500,000 that you may or may not wisely spend or commit to, $1,500 is a drop in the bucket.
It is a drop in the bucket, and at the end of the day, usually your price point isn't much different than that. The only time it can become more expensive is if the Strata Council has chosen a contractor that, for whatever reason, hasn't typically dealt with agreements, and they don't have any kind of agreement that they've used in the past, then the agreement has to be prepared sort of out of a vacuum.
Right.
But ordinarily, for $1,500, the Strata Council can get a good legal review and some advice about what things need to be changed. Contrast that with a lawsuit.
Right.
And the cost to deal with any kind of lawsuit could be into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Need to take a quick break here, but Tony, based on your years of experience, why do more Strata Councils not have those documents, those important documents, reviewed before committing ridiculous amounts of money to projects?
Well, they usually get into a sense of comfort with someone who's basically taken the leadership role, either the property manager, a council member, a consultant, somebody who said, we'll manage this for you. They're comfortable with that. And what occurs is no one is actually looking behind the lines to see all of the problems that can occur. So take a typical replumbing of a building, and one of the things that almost always goes sideways is what happens to the in-suite repairs or damages that occur as a result of the plumbing job. And that's frequently a detail that's left out of the contracts.
Right.
So people end up with unfinished walls. They end up with tiling that's broken or removed and not replaced.
Right.
And the in-suite costs for individual owners start to rise as they start refinishing their own interiors if those details are left out of the contracts.
Right.
Some of the contractors are very good about coordinating those obligations. Others don't even think of it. But for a small amount of money, that could have been captured in the agreement. And it could have saved the Strata Corporation quite a lot of harassment.
Interesting stuff. This is Key Pacific's Talk About Strata on AM 650, and we're back with lots more right after this quick timeout.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call. And there's more still ahead on AM 650.